All right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar, Trust Process, Combating Election Myths and Disinformation. My name is Danielle, she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Organizing at AAPI New Jersey. We're so excited to have you all with us today for this very special webinar. If you have any questions throughout the day, you can put them in the chat box. We'll also be doing a Q&A at the end of our time together. And then if you have any technical questions, you can reach out directly to Shira Cruz. My colleague Shira will be running tech for today's webinar. So if you have anything or if you want to submit a question anonymously, you can submit it to her and then she can reshare that with the full group. So for today's time together, we'll start with mis and disinformation with a presentation from APIAVote, and then we'll go into some voting resources from some of our friends from the New Jersey Department of State, and then from there, go into our Q&A session. And so this is just a topic that is really, really important for not just voters in New Jersey, but also Asian American voters. There's been so much mis and disinformation going on, not just about the election, but more broadly things around immigration or solidarity between other communities. And so it's something that we're hoping that we can play a role in combating. And so we're very excited to be joined today. First by Kyle. He's a digital research policy manager at APIAVote, where he monitors online conversations as they shape the national dialogue on policies related to API communities, democracy, and more. With his research, he supports policy and communications teams in strategy formulation so that APIAVote can strengthen its policy advocacy and communications to drive meaningful change for API communities. He is a 2019 graduate of James Madison University with a BA in International Affairs and minor in Political Communications. And then after we hear from Kyle, we're going to hear from Eric Kipnis, the manager of constituent relations at the New Jersey Department of State. He has experience in community organizing and issue-related campaigns in New Jersey and has organized and led statewide volunteer organizations and teams that focus on issues like healthcare, immigration reform, gun violence prevention, and LGBTQ plus rights. He led the state's grassroots census outreach team, whose work with coalitions led the highest census self-response rate in 30 years in New Jersey, which is pretty incredible. And this will result in additional important federal funding for New Jersey over the next 10 years. He currently leads the Jersey Civic Engagement Initiative, which is a nonpartisan civic engagement initiative of the New Jersey Department of State that focuses on encouraging New Jersey residents, particularly youth, to participate in the public lives of their communities. And he holds a BS in Individual and Family Studies from Penn State and a master's in Community Psychology from Temple. And a few of his team members are here as well. Brittany Jampola, the Deputy Director of the Divisions of Elections, and Yumiko Mishima, the Civic and Voter Engagement Outreach Specialist. And with that, I will stop my screen and pass it over to Kyle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Van Fleet and very excited to be here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so bear with me for 1 second. Okay, can people see the screen? Perfect. Okay, if anything happens, definitely let me know because it would not be the first time I have a technical issue. But again, hi everyone, I'm Kyle Van Fleet. I am the Digital Research and Policy Manager here at APIAVote. A little bit about me, I've been with APIAVote for about a little over 4 years, approaching five. And the work that we do here is that we are one of the nation's leading nonpartisan groups mobilizing AAPI voters to make sure that they are using their voices at the polls and getting involved civically in all the different ways that they can. But of course, to be able to participate civically also means to be able to have access to, reliable information and to combat all the threats that put our communities at risk. And of course, disinformation is at the center of all of that. So that's my job here is to kind of monitor what are the latest trends in terms of disinformation, how that turns into policy, how that shapes national dialogue, and helping our partners figure out ways to combat it. So I do want to apologize in advance that I have a bit of a cough. So if I'm coughing throughout this presentation, sorry. But all right, let's go ahead and go into it. So just to give a bit of an agenda of what I'm going to go over today, I'm going to briefly talk about a little bit more about what I do specifically in my role, and then I'm going to dive into kind of the 101, talk about some definitions, how disinformation spreads, who benefits from disinformation and why this actually matters. And then we're going to talk about what we can actually do to combat disinformation as well as identify it. This will include some general messaging guidance as well as something called the truth sandwich, which maybe some of you have heard of, but if not, I think it's a very useful tool to for messaging. All right, so let's get into it. So again, API Vote is leading the push to increase the capacity of all of our communities to monitor and counter disinformation. What I do on a day-to-day basis is I use our social listening tools to kind of identify what some problematic trends might be in terms of conversations. To give a kind of recent example, doing the research that we do, we were able to identify the growing conversation last September that was targeting Haitians, for instance, and we were able to identify that as a story that was gaining momentum and would eventually hit the mainstream. And so, because of that, we were able to be prepared to talk about this issue and alert our partners that this was coming down the pike. And here are some things we should or shouldn't do regarding that. We create biweekly reports, providing communication recommendations and other resources so that our partners can be informed, ahead of time, so they are prepared when things like that happen. We also make social media content and we host training programs similar to this. And we hope to do more with this anti-disinformation program down the line. So I can talk more about that in the future. But that's just a little bit of background about what we do here at API Vote. So going into the 101 of it all, here are some key things that I think is important for anyone who wants to know anything about mis and disinformation to know. So there's a lot of terms that kind of like float around. I often just use the term disinformation because it's the one that people generally are most familiar with, but there's actually some key differences amongst these terms that I think are important for people to know. But ultimately, when you're talking to people, it's best to use language that they're going to understand. So misinformation is information that is believed to be true by those sharing it and is shared without the intention to cause harm. So this might be your auntie suggesting eating carrots will help your eyesight. Obviously, that is not necessarily that's not carrots are great for you, but that's not necessarily true, right? But it's not with the intent to cause harm. It's with the intent to you know, help others. So that would be misinformation. Then we have disinformation, which is information that is false and is shared intentionally to cause harm. Um, Kind of one sort of pop culture example of this is when I was growing up, at least, some major things that I always heard was that Michelle Obama and that Lady Gaga were actually men, right? So obviously this is completely false, but these narratives were shared intentionally to try and cause harm to both of their reputations. Then there's malinformation, right? Which is information that is based on reality but is used to harm or threaten a person, organization, or country. This is actually what is most common, and which is what makes disinformation and this whole field a bit difficult, is there's usually some grain of truth. Things are usually not just completely false, right? But a good example of this recently is the distortion of crime statistics in major US cities, right? So you may look at DC, for instance, which is where I live, and you take the violent crime rate and you say it's extraordinarily high, it's a dangerous city, more must be done. And while the statistic might be true, and there might be a real conversation to be had about dealing with crime and public safety in Washington, D.C., it takes out of context the fact that crime rates have been going down. It is significantly lower than other places in this country. And basically, all this is to harm the reputation of this city of Washington, D.C., while using little bits of fact to hold on to, but you are completely taking so much out of context that it's not really good information. And then there's propaganda, which is true or false information spread to persuade an audience, which is often politically connotated. They may use accurate but selectively presented information and identified sources. So this is a bit similar to malinformation, and the lines can be a little bit blurry, but the main difference is it's to persuade an audience to usually take some sort of political action, right? So an example of this might be spreading one or two instances of an immigrant who commits a crime and painting a broader picture to say, immigrants are the reason that crime rates are going up, and therefore you should vote for our candidate or our party because we're the only ones who are going to do anything about it, right? So that obviously has the political connotation. and has a little bit of truth to it. By maybe these are real instances, but don't are not reflective of what the truer reality is, right? So again, these terms are important, but if you just use the term disinformation, that's also fine. But there's some key differences. So I often like to talk about how disinformation specifically impacts the API community differently than others. Um, but before I actually get into that, this may sound like I'm arguing against myself, but APIs, like any other person, like any other group in this country, are exposed to disinformation in the same places as others, whether it's the news, social media, or from their personal circles. That's kind of true across the board. And I don't want to make it seem like APIs are so unique that that's not true. However, there are things that are truly different, right? APIs use a wide array of platforms in most ethnic groups, such as WeChat, Weibo, Line, and these platforms often have fewer protections to prevent disinformation from spreading. And it's bad on those platforms. It's also bad on mainstream platforms. Oftentimes, their moderation content or content moderation policies are bad in English, but they often don't put any effort into really making sure that other languages are having the same level of content moderation. There hasn't been too many studies that look at Asian languages specifically, unfortunately, but there have been studies that show a big discrepancy between disinformation in English and Spanish in the rates of whether or not that's taken down are drastically different. So if you imagine Spanish, one of the most widely spoken languages in the world, they're not doing a good job at that. You can only imagine what it is in languages like Korean or Thai or whatnot. So all to say, mainstream platforms or platforms like WeChat, none of them are doing a very good job at moderating disinformation and other harmful content. And this is where our communities often get their information. This information can also be directed towards or about APIs, which kind of creates a bit of a double whammy for our communities that other communities in the US just may not necessarily have to deal with. And so this is something that we need to really be cognizant about when we talk about this information in the API community. And then lastly, obviously there's a huge immigrant population within the API community, and so not too surprisingly, they probably try and keep up with news of wherever they immigrated from, correct? Which obviously in itself is not a bad thing. But what can happen, of course, is when you are operating within very different, information ecosystems. Disinformation is transnational. Disinformation is not only an American problem; it's a problem in pretty much any country that has access to the internet, right? And so by being exposed potentially to disinformation in another country, and that kind of information ecosystem that may shape one's views here. And one really good example I'd like to share is obviously there's a lot of Hindu nationalist rhetoric going on in India. If you are an Indian immigrant and you're plugged into the information ecosystems in India, there's a there's a good chance that you may come across some of that content and that may kind of shape your views here. And so all to say, a lot of APIs may be receiving disinformation or other problematic, harmful narratives, not just in the American context, but internationally. So that's a bit different than communities that don't have as high of an immigrant population. I'm not going to go over necessarily every single one of these, but just to kind of give a general idea of some of the narrative categories that we monitor at APIAVote and we believe are particularly prominent and problematic in 2025 and probably for the foreseeable future. There's obviously a lot of narratives that are seeking to erode trust in government and elections. This looks like false claims that non-citizens are voting at high rates, kind of tilting elections in a party's favor in an illegal manner, lies about mail-in voting, early voting, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, this is with the goal to make us believe our elections aren't trustworthy in order for bad actors to actually roll back our democracy. And then, of course, there's a bunch of attempts to divide our communities. Um, this is a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric against legal and undocumented immigrants. I emphasize that because I think historically it's been very much against undocumented, but within the last year we've seen a drastic change of people really going after legal immigrants and legal residents as well. We have the Black on Asian crime trope, which has been persistent for a very long time. Basically, it's this idea that anti-Asian hate or crimes against Asian people are largely perpetuated by Black people, which research shows again and again that's false. But if you're able to find one or two instances of a Black person attacking an Asian person, you can paint a bigger story. Goes back to the malinformation definition I gave. And then, yeah, of course, rising anti-Indian sentiment, Islamophobia, anti-Sikhism, rising Hindu nationalism. These are all really big attempts to divide our communities with the goal to turn us against each other. So we don't work together because we're obviously stronger together. And so we're busy fighting each other and not paying attention to anything else that is happening and ultimately probably harming us. And then we have anti-China rhetoric, which includes a lot of red baiting, which in other words is trying to tie people, candidates oftentimes to the Chinese Communist Party or claiming that they are communist or socialist just to completely, make them seem like they are not trustworthy or ever worth listening to. And it's often not based on anything factual. There's a lot of fear mongering about Chinese spies infiltrating American institutions and just generally blaming China for societal and economic woes that they probably have absolutely nothing to do with. And of course, the goal here is to create an easy boogeyman that oftentimes exploits real historical traumas that members of our community face and just uses racist tropes with the ultimate goal to for bad actors to win and maintain power. So again, this is of course not all the disinformation that exists out there. There is plenty more, especially if you want to talk about medical disinformation. But these are some of the key categories that we monitor at API Vote, and we believe will continue to shape elections in the coming years. So again, we've talked a bit about like some of the definitions between mis and disinformation, what some of the narrative buckets are, but how does it actually spread? So to really boil it down to one term, surveillance capitalism really encompasses it. It's where human experience, particularly online behavior, is treated as a source of data for extraction, prediction, and profit. Companies collect vast amounts of data or user data, often without explicit consent, and use it to create predictive models that can anticipate future behavior. In other words, whatever we do online, they keep track of it. And because they want to keep us on their platforms, they emotionally manipulate us to put content that makes us mad, um, maybe sad, maybe we really like it. Basically, they put content in front of us to keep us engaged because that's how platforms make money. And oftentimes, these algorithms that do that can easily push people down some dangerous rabbit holes. I talked about earlier that there's poor social media moderation because if they had to take down all the problematic content, they'd be getting a lot less emotional reaction from us, which would mean that we are using their platform significantly less. So that's kind of in sum. One of the biggest ways that disinformation is able to spread is that social media companies at this particular moment do not have a lot of incentive to not put that in front of our eyes. I already mentioned poor social media moderation, but of course, it's not just social media companies, right? We have to talk about the bad actors and their various tactics too, right? So one of their key tactics is artificial manipulation. This looks like bots. It looks like generative AI. There's gaming algorithms. One example of this from my research is um, there would be a bunch of different Facebook pages that seemingly have nothing to do with each other. Pages might be called like Patriots Unite or I Love America, et cetera, et cetera. And these pages would post the same article with this information at the same time. That way, the platform thinks, oh, people are talking about this. Let's boost this and put it in front of more people's eyes. When it's not actually a lot of people talking about it, it's coordinated networks trying to make sure that they're able to rig the algorithm in a way that benefits their message. But it's also true on TikTok as well, where people can weaponize TikTok audios, just to give another example. Then there's in-network engagement. What this basically looks like is trying to pull people away from um, platforms or spaces that have a variety of opinion and kind of get them to only enter their echo chamber. So this looks like pulling people away from mainstream platforms to maybe Telegram, to Substack, where they're only receiving the information these bad actors want them to receive. So that's in-network engagement. And then lastly, bad actors are not stupid. They're very good at communications, otherwise they wouldn't be as influential as they are. They are always repeating their message. They're finding new ways to get their message in front of more people. They use different platforms So they're not only reaching part of the audience that they could potentially reach. Um, but of course, I talk a lot about bad actors, I talk a lot about social media companies, but there's a lot more to the problem than just that. There's just a general lack of media literacy in this country in general. This is often true for more for older generations at times, for immigrant communities at times. There's also insufficient in-language resources for API communities. So for those who English may not be their first language, they're looking to find information on XYZ issue that doesn't exist because they're just those resources just people aren't thinking that they need to make how to vote in how to vote guides in lesser spoken languages. That opens up a door for bad actors to kind of push whatever they want to, and when they're the only ones giving their information or giving that message, it it provides a way for people to get sucked into these kind of extremist spaces. Insufficient community outreach. What this really boils down to is if candidates, parties, government officials, anyone looking to really you know make inroads within the API community, and they're not actually showing up. They're not building trust. When there's no trust, which obviously gets to the last point, lack of trust, then that also opens the door for disinformation because you're more likely to believe lies about people that you have never heard from or interacted with. So, just briefly going over this, who benefits from disinformation? I think pretty obviously certain politicians do. It allows them, to win elections, pass policy, gain notoriety, make money, etc. But you don't have to be a politician to necessarily benefit, right? You could be an influencer or commentator, and a lot of the same benefits are the same. You can build a following, influence public opinion, and obviously see policies that you want passed and make money off of it. Foreign governments, of course, as well. I don't like to focus too much on this because while there is obviously a lot of proof that actors in Russia, China, even Vietnam have tried to manipulate Americans' public opinion to either align with theirs or to just simply polarize us. I think we do a good enough job of doing this at home that I don't want to focus too much on their operations, even though they are very real. And then, of course, again, corporate interests, as I mentioned earlier, with surveillance capitalism, there's not a whole lot of incentive for social media companies to do more to curb disinformation when it really does, keep us engaged on their platforms. So this is another group that really benefits from disinformation being able to proliferate. And I include this slide because there was one time that I was genuinely asked, why does this matter? And it's because disinformation is not just something that happens online. It's not just chatter. It's not just your annoying relative. It does lead to some very tangible consequences, right? It can lead to the erosion of democracy. The SAVE Act, if you all are familiar with it, is legislation that seeks to basically make it significantly harder to vote because they believe that there's so many non-citizens voting in elections. That is not something that came out of the blue. That is something that started very much online in far right circles. And so that's a really good example of how that turns into potential policy. So again, erosion of democracy, it can lead to increased discrimination and violence. We saw this especially during the peak of anti-Asian racism and hate crimes in the early 2020s. Rolling back of civil rights and liberties, heightened division and polarization, generally less safe. I want to make a kind of an asterisk here that, obviously I mean that in terms of discrimination and violence, but I also mean that in terms of like medical disinformation and what that can do to us and our health, right? And public health. And then, of course, I just want to make it really clear that this impacts all communities. And of course, APIs are not immune from it. So, moving into some of the things that we can do. Obviously, it's important to be able to identify when you are coming across mis and disinformation, but it's not always easy. Even as someone who has been working in this field for a number of years, I still fall for things every now and then, right? But it's important to have kind of the toolkit in your mind to be able to realize when you are making that mistake. So some of the sources that well, first, always check the source of where you're getting your information. And there's some different ways that you can and make sure that that source is reliable, right? So there's Media Bias Fact Check, which is a really good website. It will basically you type in an outlet and it will tell you what its political leaning is and how factual its reporting is. And if they don't have it, then allsites.com is very similar. They do basically the same thing. Sometimes one website has an outlet and the other doesn't, but I usually look to these two first to make sure that whatever I'm reading something from is actually worth my time, or I know that it has a certain political leaning and I keep that in mind. Um, factcheck.org, Snopes, Associated Press Fact Check. You've probably heard of these. I think these are still very useful. These really work best for like the most viral stories because they obviously don't cover everything. But if you're seeing something all over your feed, there's a good chance that one of these platforms, or sorry, one of these resources have already probably put a fact check article out about it. And then two resources I like to highlight: Viet Fact Check and palba.org. Viet Fact Check and palba.org do fact checking in Vietnamese and Mandarin. And so this is a really good resource for our community. I would like to see more of these types of resources in more different languages, and I may not necessarily be familiar with every single one that exists, but I have worked with these two groups specifically in the past, so I can definitely recommend these two. If no one, if you come across something and there's no trustworthy source covering the story, that's also a really good indicator that maybe we should take a step back. If it's some random account making a big claim and the New York Times isn't covering it, then maybe there's something that to check out. One example I'd like to give, like 10 years ago, my dad texted me that Russia had invaded Poland, and I said that feels like really big news. And, I go on Google News and absolutely no one's covering it, and he heard this on some random YouTube video, right? So again, if something like that supposedly happens and no one's covering it, look into it a little bit more. Some other things I suggest people do, ask yourself, does this provoke an emotional response? Again, as I talked about earlier, the spread of disinformation often relies on manipulating us emotionally. And so, again, you may read an article and it maybe does make you mad because it genuinely is an awful story. Maybe it really makes you sad. But when it does that, you have to ask yourself, is it doing this because that's just how it makes me feel, or is it doing that because it's trying to make me feel that way? And if it's trying to make you feel that way, it's definitely a good time to say, hey, maybe I should take a step back and see why are they trying to do this to me? Is this too good or weird to be true? Usually it probably is. If that feels the case, then check other sources, see what other people are saying. Analyze grammar and sensationalism. For some reason, bad actors uh, have really found a voice with their caps lock on all the time, right? Or they misspell things all the time. And so if that feels like the case, then maybe don't engage with it too much. Again, who is the intended audience? You can usually pick this up by kind of looking at some of the language they use um, to kind of give examples from both sides. If you see an article or a post use the term globalism, that's usually something that only people on the far right tend to say in reference to their belief that globalization is this like really nefarious and conspiratorial thing. Or maybe on the left, you see people use the term like, racial equity, which of course is not necessarily a bad term at all, but you can tell that the audience is probably for more left-leaning people if that terminology is being used, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with either of those terms being used, but it should make you step back and say, okay, who is this really for? And is this really the most balanced and factual information I can actually receive? And then, of course, again, why was this made? Was this made to persuade me, or was this made to, inform me? And that's a really important distinction. And again, persuasion is not in itself a bad thing, but it should make you take a step back and kind of make you think about it a little bit deeper. And then lastly, don't trust your algorithmic feed. I think hopefully I've sown enough doubt into you all by this point that, you should not necessarily trust everything that the algorithm is pushing your way, because there's obviously some incentives for social media companies to and bad actors to really keep you engaged, mad, sad, all those different things. And there just really isn't a whole lot of moderation, less moderation than there was 5 years ago. So again, not everything on your feed is going to be bad, but oftentimes it's better to look at actual sources that you trust in their websites, or their wherever their platforms or accounts might be. So some general messaging guidance. The most important thing that I can leave you all with, if I don't have, and if nothing else resonates with you today in this presentation, is don't repeat the lie, right? When you repeat this information, you are more likely to spread it to more people, right? Because they may not have heard it otherwise. So we only really recommend people. We really only recommend people talk about the lie if it's something that I like to call water cooler talk, or absolutely everyone's talking about it. It's an unavoidable story. Um, and it looks weird if you don't actually engage with it. But otherwise, engaging and repeating a lie is one of the most ineffective things that you can do. Always ask yourself if a response is necessary. There's different ways to kind of gauge how big a story is, but if it feels like maybe one or two accounts are talking about something, but no one else is, you may only be boosting disinformation by actually responding to it. Again, we really only recommend responding if the story seems to be something that a lot of people are talking about. And then, of course, understand the emotional needs. We should not necessarily blame people for falling for disinformation. We're all super busy. We also, read things in passing. I'm guilty of that as well. And, not really taking the time to fact check all the time. And also, if you have really, if you're falling on hard economic times and, you feel like you don't have a voice or the government's not looking out for you and you hear these false stories about immigrants getting credit cards and such, you're going to, it makes sense that you may fall for that. And so, it's important not to necessarily blame people for falling for disinformation, and we need to come into all these conversations with a certain level of empathy and understanding, even if it's just egregious, right? So common tactics that we recommend to organizations, but I think individuals can take on as well. First one is inoculation. It's the same logic as getting a vaccine. If you're putting out good messaging, reliable information before people come across the bad stuff, at least they're going to be skeptical. So one way that this may play out is if you know there's an important election coming down the line, it's probably important that you start talking about what the voting laws in a particular state are, how people can vote early or vote by mail. Um, and so that way, when they come across stuff that says, oh, mail-in voting is full of fraud, or, vote on this particular day, which may be the wrong day, then at least they're going to be skeptical. But sometimes it's not helpful to necessarily try and debunk stuff. It's more effective to reveal the bad actors' motives. And what this might look like is saying, this person is giving medical advice, but they have absolutely no medical background. They have no degree, and they sell XYZ products, and so they're doing that to they're putting out this messaging to profit off of your fear. And so again, sometimes when you get stuck in the details of trying to kind of explain why a lie is a lie, you may already be losing the conversation. But if you're able to sever the trust between the person you're talking to and wherever they're getting that information, that has often been shown to prove more effective. Then we have this strategy called listen, pivot, contrast, which is kind of how we recommend people engage in conversations that where someone may be saying something with this information. So oftentimes I give a whole kind of presentation on this piece specifically, but just to give you a very, very quick rundown of what this looks like. To listen means to identify the actual underlying concern that's really driving the potential belief in a false narrative and making sure that they feel heard when they are sharing what they think, right? So someone, again, using the example I used earlier, someone's talking about immigrants getting credit cards and not being fair. Or sorry, maybe a better example is getting debit cards from the government, right? So obviously they're hooked onto that story, but the real underlying concern is they don't feel like they're financially secure and they don't feel like that the government is looking out for them, right? And so then the pivot would be to meet them where they are on that concern, and then you might say, I understand, times are hard right now economically, et cetera, et cetera. But then you want to redirect them toward understanding the why behind the lies. So that might be saying, people are spreading all this false information about immigrants because they want you to be distracted from XYZ happening at the top of the government, right? And then with the contrast, you again don't want to repeat the line necessarily, but you want to focus on your truth that you want them to connect with, believe and repeat, and walk away from the conversation with. And so there, insert partisan, whatever you believe. Doesn't even have to be partisan necessarily, but you want to make sure that you leave them with the values that you just want to make sure you have not focused on what the disinformation is, but they leave with whatever you want them to remember that's in contrast to what they're saying. And then we have the truth sandwich, which is what I have a page for after this, so I'll talk about that then. And then some other things we recommend keeping in mind. If you're not combating disinformation or putting out your message on different platforms or different mediums, you're not reaching all the audience you could. So that's obviously ineffective. Engage trusted messengers. Sometimes it's important to just reflect and say, hey, maybe we're not the organization or person to talk about XYZ issue. If you are like at APIAVote, we're not necessarily the group to talk about reproductive rights if we come across this information, but we may connect with a group that that's their specialty, and so we would ask them to, maybe they would be the trusted messenger to talk on that issue instead. And then again, with such a diverse linguistic group within the API community, we always recommend people do their anti-disinformation work or combat narratives in as many languages as they can. And then just really quickly, things that don't work, fact checks, don't change minds. We shouldn't be trusting social media companies to do the right thing in this moment. That may not always be true, but in this moment, that seems to be the case. Public shaming doesn't necessarily work. It may get likes, but it doesn't necessarily get results. Always pull people aside or message them directly. And then we shouldn't expect that appealing to experts is always going to work. It's kind of the same thing with fact checks. People are more emotionally driven than not. And so even though this may work for certain audiences, experts and fact checks, unfortunately, just may land flat on when talking to the audiences that we need to reach the most. And so I'll just quickly go over what the truth sandwich is. Again, it's a communication strategy. You can use it in talking, or you can use it when you're writing a post. You start with the truth, you acknowledge the lie and problem, and then you end with the truth, because it works basically on the basic psychology that you remember the first and last thing, not the middle of a conversation. So just to give an example, and this is basically my last slide, so thank you for bearing with me. The truth: every eligible American should have the ability to cast their vote freely and fairly, no matter their race, gender, zip code, or social class. Lie: some are spreading conspiracy theories about ineligible persons voting and are passing laws that undermine Americans' freedom to vote as a result. Without a functioning democracy, we lose the ability to advocate for the issues that matter most to us. We must work together to protect and strengthen our freedom to vote, not roll it back, so we can continue the important work of improving the lives of our families and communities. So again, you're starting and ending with what you want people to remember. You acknowledge the lie or the disinformation that they may be thinking about without explicitly repeating illegals are voting right. And hopefully you're able to at least get them to start thinking about this issue a bit differently than if you had just tried to say, well, illegals aren't voting because XYZ fact, right? This tries to find common ground and, be more values driven. So that's essentially the end of my presentation. And so I'll leave this QR code up here for just a couple seconds if you are interested in joining the channel where we do send out our reports, our alerts and actions digests. And so if you all have any questions, definitely feel free to ask. But yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kyle, for sharing all of that information. Just want to uplift something in the chat box from Dave, who said, "Love how to combat misinformation, especially the tactic of debumping the quote credentials of propagandists." And I'll just say I've been in a few of Kyle's sessions on mis and disinformation, and I feel like the more that I'm exposed to it, the more I feel like I will be ready when the time comes that I have to have one of these conversations with someone. And it's super helpful to be able to know how to respond in the moment. And we will be sending out again today's resources, so folks don't have to like memorize everything that you just learned from Kyle. And with that, we'll turn it over to our friends at the New Jersey Department of State. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Kipnis. I'm Manager of Constituent Relations at the New Jersey Department of State. And if you will bear with me, I am going to load up um, uh, my slide presentation. And everybody see that okay? Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you for inviting us to spend some time with you this afternoon. As Danielle mentioned, I'm joined by Brittany Giampola, Deputy Director of Division of Elections, and Yumi Mishima, our Civic and Voter Engagement Outreach Specialist at the Department of State, to help answer any questions and add on any additional information. And at the Department of State, we really value civic and voter engagement. We want people to vote. We want all eligible voters to vote. That's our nonpartisan mission, is to get people to vote and be engaged. And that's what Jersey Civic Engage, the program and initiative that I manage, is all about. Today, I'm going to talk about some of that, but mostly just about everything I want to talk about is about information and tools that are available to New Jersey voters. We are really lucky and fortunate to live in a state that provides such easy access to voting and different ways of voting for all those who are eligible. I'm going to start with a couple of premises. I think most everybody on this call is probably familiar with John Lewis and what he's had to say. And we've taken it to heart at the Department of State. To us, as John Lewis said, democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part. In other words, democracy in this country is not about what we have. It is what we do. And we believe he was speaking mostly to young people. He's speaking to all of us, but we do believe he was speaking to young people once he spoke about each generation needing to do its part and be involved. Part of being involved means being civically engaged, and we focus on that a lot in our programs. And civic engagement and voting, of course, are intertwined. And because they're intertwined, the combination allows voting to empower us. In fact, voting is a key form of civic engagement. And I'll talk a little bit about how they're related, but in this following statement, it is really our belief, and it's more complicated than this, but I'm not going to dwell on it beyond this particular statement because there's lots to cover. It's our belief, and we're not alone in this, that the more people have a stake in their community, the more likely they are to involve others, and that increases the likelihood of people voting. There's something at stake to vote for and about. And this is a core message that we ask you to take out back to your community, and we ask each community, everybody that we speak to bring it back to their community, that message back to their communities, and try to actualize that, to make that happen. To illustrate, you've probably all seen this picture before, this graphic. So many say their vote doesn't matter. This is an illustration, and you hear that this time of year. This is an illustration that shows how voting empowers us. When we vote together, those who we vote for are much more accountable to us. The more people vote, the more accountability they have back to their to constituents, regardless of the level of elected office. If you want to find out more about Jersey Civic Engage and our programs, then please go to jerseycivicengage.nj.gov. You'll see programs like the New Jersey Ballot Bowl, which we're in the midst of right now, which is a campus voter registration and pledge to vote competition, nonpartisan. There's the New Jersey High School Voter Registration Week program, where we've influenced thousands and thousands of voter registrations. And of course, also the New Jersey Information Portal, NJ Vote, at vote.nj.gov, which I'm going to talk about in a second, which is our prime tool for voter our prime online tool for voter engagement in the state. There's other programs as well. I'm not going to go into them right now, but again, Jersey civicengage.nj.gov. So let's talk about voting. Of course, the general election is a great way to get engaged in your community and engage others in not only in their community, but in our democracy. And one of the things that voters need, and they need various things to get the job done, good information, as Kyle pointed out, is critical. And that's in part where vote.nj.gov comes in. Voters need accurate information that they can trust in order to inform themselves. The New Jersey Voter Information Portal, which is at vote.nj.gov, which you'll hear me say a lot in this presentation, is the state's official website for, along with county election websites, by the way, which are very, very trusted. That gives voters the most trusted and up-to-date election-related information. It's a one-stop shop for voters to find out everything they need to know to vote. It's very widely utilized by individual voters and organizations across the state, and we want to make sure that everyone knows about it and uses it. So it's vote.nj.gov, and what you'll find there is easy access. What a voter will find there is easy access to information for everything from voter registration, early in-person voting, which is, of course, coming up this Saturday, the start of that, to secure drop-box locations, to polling places, and more. Now, I know the voter registration for this election for this particular election has passed, but it's still worth talking about what the requirements are for voting in New Jersey to pass on back. The voter registration shop doesn't close; it's still open. So for the next time around, in New Jersey, you can register to vote when you're 17 and vote when you're 18. It's easy. You can register online or by using a postage paid voter registration form that you can get online or from your county election officials. If you want to see if you're already registered to vote, there's a tool on vote.nj.gov called Am I Registered? And you simply put in some basic information, and it will, if you're registered, your information is going to pop up and confirm your registration. No need to aim your cameras at this quite yet. You're all going to get a copy of this presentation. But for those that if you want to share this with others, this is a QR code to our voter registration, register to vote pages on the voter information portal. This is just a representation of the online voter information form. This is and it will give you at the outset the information that you need, that you require to get started to vote. It's easy, whether you're using your license as your point of entry, whether you're using the last 4 digits of your social security number, which it'll prompt you for if you don't have a license or a motor vehicle's ID card. It takes you step by step through the voter information process. It is clearly at this point, and Brittany will correct me if I'm wrong, the most used method of voter registration in the state.
You are correct, Eric.
I thought so. And this is just a Spanish version of it. It's available in translated forms on the website for other languages as well. This is just the paper forms. Lots of people still use paper forms. People like paper. They are printable and downloadable from our website. For each county, actually, each county's registration form is printable, is downloadable and printable. Why do you want to have a county registration form? It has the correct address on it for the county that you're registering in. So it's a good idea to use those. That doesn't preclude you from using the general one that comes to Trenton. We then get it and record it and forward it to the correct county. But it's just by using the county form, you eliminate one step. We have a heavy commitment to young people and getting them engaged in this at the Department of State. So we have specifically designed a portion of the voter information portal for student voters and young voters, really. And interestingly enough, called the Student Voter Registration and Voting page. And it provides links to voter registration tools, including the online voter registration forms, and links to printable postage-free voter registration forms for each county. There's also a link on there for a program called, a presentation called Be an Informed New Jersey Voter. You're actually looking in part at that presentation, so you'll be able to get that. You'll have that when we send this to you. And we have it there for students or anyone to click on to find out the kinds of information that they need to vote. We've already talked about this. Deadline's passed. Shop is still open 24/7 though, and people can certainly register for the next time around if they didn't get to do it for this election. In New Jersey, there's 3 ways to vote. So let's talk about those 3 ways. 1 is at your polling place on election day. 2 is in-person early voting, which starts this Saturday, the 25th, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a sec. And then, of course, there is vote by mail. First one that I mentioned was voting on election day. Election day is Tuesday, November the 4th. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And you can go to vote.nj.gov to find out your polling location. Those are updated by the county. With county posted it with information that the counties send us, and we update them on a very regular basis. They're pretty complete at this point. There's always little last minute changes, but you'll get the most accurate and trusted information. Or you can go to a county site if you want to find out. Again, the most trusted and accurate information in either place. In-person early voting starts Saturday. It has become very popular. Started slow, not anymore, not since the last election. It's a very convenient way to vote. And it runs from Saturday, October 25th through Sunday, November the 2nd. Each New Jersey county will hold 9 days of early in-person voting for this election. And each voting location will be open Monday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Sundays of the voting period from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And you can go to, you guessed it, vote.nj.gov to find your early voting sites. Voting by mail has always been popular in New Jersey. A very convenient way to vote. I happen to use it all the time because I never know where I'm going to be on election day. So I want to make sure that my vote's in. Applications for mail-in ballots can be found at, again, the portal at vote.nj.gov. The deadline to submit a mail-in ballot application to a county clerk to receive your ballot by mail is October 28th. It should be in their hands by then. And the reason we mention that date is because that gives the mail enough time to come back to you. If you get past the 28th, you might want to consider going in person to your county clerk's office, and you can do that by November 3rd at 3 p.m. to get a vote by mail ballot. And lots of people do that, so don't think that you would necessarily be alone. You wouldn't be, but it's important to know that. We want to give people enough time, heads up time, to be able to get their ballot back in time. Once you put in your ballot, we encourage people to use the Track My Ballot tool, which allows you to find out whether your vote's been received. Some counties will send you a card that says, yeah, we got it. Others will inform you in various ways. You can always call them, but a very reliable tool, and it's a secure tool, is the Track My Ballot tool. Just go to vote.nj.gov. It will tell you that what you need, particularly to sign up, your voter ID number, which, by the way, can be found at the Am I Registered page on your ballot, at the Am I Register page, uh, excuse me, on vote.nj.gov or on your vote by mail ballot. That's the best way. That's the best. That they also suggest the driver's license number or the last four digits of your social security number. Our experience is using the voter ID number when you sign up for this tool is the most effective. Once you've filled out your ballot, and you've signed it and you've sealed it and you're ready to go, how do you return your ballot? Well, by mail, obviously. Needs to be postmarked before 8 p.m. on November the 4th, or secure ballot drop box, which you can place your ballot in one of your county's secure ballot drop boxes by 8 p.m. on November 4th. Drop box locations can be found at vote.nj.gov, or you can go to your Board of Elections office and deliver your ballot in person to your county's Board of Elections office by 8 p.m. on November 4th. That contact information for those offices is found on the portal. A note, as has been the case for other elections this last several years, your mail-in ballot cannot be returned to your early voting location or polling place for this election. This is a representation of a flyer that we have called 3 Ways to Vote, that if you want to distribute it to your community, tells people about the 3 ways they can vote. Before I go on to the next slides, I wanted to spend a little bit of time. Kyle did such a great job with disinformation and misinformation and malinformation, but there are some we think that kind of knowledge is incredibly important. So we have a page on the portal called Safe and Secure Elections. And its goal is to inform voters and the public about false or misleading information and how to verify what they see online. It, as Kyle mentioned and he defined, it defines misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation in simple terms, and reminds everyone that the most accurate details come from official state and county sources. The page also includes infographics, such as the Trusted Sources graphic and deepfake an AI infographic, which can be seen, which I'm going to show you on your next slide. There's also a dedicated email at info@sos.nj.gov, where the public can report any information they see online or on social media that they believe may be dis, or malinformation. Overall, it's part of New Jersey's efforts to raise awareness, strengthen voter confidence, and promote informed participation in elections.
Hey, Eric, sorry, we are at 3 o'clock and I see some folks are having to hop off of the webinar. We did have a couple of questions. I'm not sure if you, your team, and Kyle have just 1 or 2 minutes.
We do. This is the other infographic. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to make one mention. Poll workers, sign up. Some counties still need it. You can sign up through us. We don't do the hiring, the counties do. But get it to us at pollworker.nj.gov. You can, as young as 16, you can start. I'm not going to go through all these dates again. You've already seen them. We do have an ask. The ask is this: just make sure that to get people to participate, tell them to make a plan to vote, make sure they're registered to vote, make a commitment to vote, and then ask 5 friends to vote. Become a poll worker. Tell people about vote.nj.gov and follow us on our social media pages. And yes, we can answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric, and thank you, Kyle. And Shira, I'm actually wondering, I have to hop out of the call, but would you be able to ask, and there were some questions we dropped in, are you able to ask those so that our folks here can still get some responses to those?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Kyle. So we have some questions. Feel free to both answer. So the first question is, how, if at all, should you engage with misinformation on social media?
Yeah, I guess I can start with that. First thing I would say is look at like how much attention it's getting. If again, it's like maybe one or two posts, not too many likes, not too many retweets or whatever platform it's on, probably not worth really engaging with because again, you risk making other people more people see it than they otherwise would. But if it's something you hear people talking about, if it's something you see like a friend post that would not otherwise be engaging with something political, then I would say, yeah, that's probably the time that you should probably, as an organization, start developing like what is your response going to be. Ideally, you can predict what misinformation, disinformation narratives might come down the pike, and you are doing something in advance. But viral stories break every now and then. Um, so it's really about assessing like how much attention is something getting, and that's what I'm here as a resource for because I can tell you what is and isn't worth engaging with. Just to kind of close that out, I think my role as someone who monitors disinformation, the biggest thing I do is not tell everyone to panic. It's actually rapid calmness, which is this is happening. You don't need to do anything about it at this moment. That's usually the most common thing I suggest.
I love that. I love the idea of rapid calmness. This is my first time hearing it because I think, especially when we see misinformation become very viral, our immediate response is like to go into the comments and try to each comment counter what is being said. So this might be a question more for you, Eric. In terms of voter registration,
Mhm.
there is a youth voter registered when she turned 17, but doesn't come as a registered voter since she's still 17 and then turns 18 just before the election, but couldn't confirm her registration. What should she do?
I may defer to Brittany on this, but my first thought is to call your county elections office and ask them if she is an active voter and if she's on the rolls. If you register at age 17 and you turn 18 on or before election day, you can vote. Okay, that's the bottom line. Did I get that right, Britt?
Yeah, I think there's like some missing information though in the question. I don't see it on here where she was trying to confirm her registration. But you can always reach out to the commissioner of registration, or if she's in a county that has a superintendent, the superintendent of elections serves as a commissioner of registration. They can give you all that information. But it may have just been a scenario where her application had not been processed. But Eric is accurate. If a 17-year-old turns 18 by on election day or by election day, they're eligible to vote, assuming they meet all of the requirements.
Yes, just assuming they're eligible to begin with. Right, exactly.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Eric. Yes, we've been encountering a lot of youth volunteers in our canvassing and tabling, and many of them would say, "Oh no, I turn, etc., etc." Now that's been clarified. That's really great. For both of you, this is the last question because I saw on your slides, and I think also for yours as well, Kyle. What do you do if you encounter AI and it's been really hard to now detect it? Uh, how can you detect AI? Or what are some like telltale signs that it is AI? And that's the final question.
Do you want to go first, Eric?
No, I'm going to leave this one to you because you're much more of an expert on that. I mean, there's any number of jokes about AI. Some people are really bad at it. I mean, when you see people with three arms and arms in the wrong place, it's fairly obvious. Most of them are not that obvious. But so go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, there really is no straightforward answer. If you asked me this a few years ago, I would have said, "Oh, look at the hands," as Eric mentioned. But obviously AI is getting more sophisticated. I think a really good example of this is thinking beyond just like the imagery of it all, because I think when you look at images, you can usually tell by the texture that like the skin doesn't look quite right, or again going back to one of the basic questions I say, ask yourself, is it too good to be true? But in New Hampshire, when there was the whole kind of scandal with fake Biden audio, giving wrong kind of problematic information to voters in the Granite State, that's obviously a lot easier to fall for. And so again, I think it's important to remember AI is not necessarily like something that is going to completely upend the way we understand and deal with disinformation. it's just a new way to produce it much more quickly and sometimes more in a way that's more believable. So, but you should still be asking the same questions as I mentioned earlier, like who's this coming from? Who's talking about this? What is the goal of this? Is there another source that can confirm what is being said or shown? Yeah, I think the same questions still apply. But yeah, in terms of like how to detect it, it is unfortunately going to get harder. But I do think, at least in terms of images, just definitely look at the texture because that is always the tall tale sign for me.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Eric. I know that's more of the obvious signs of the weird arm or extra fingers, and a really good, like sort of critical thinking questions to ask yourself before you see an image or a video. So that's all the time that we have today. Thank you for everyone for staying for the remainder of our webinar today on Trust the Process, Combating Election Mis and Disinformation. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you for all the folks who have stayed on. And we will follow up with an email along with the resources and presentation that you have seen today. So we hope you have a great day. And if you have any questions, feel free to email advocacy@aapi.newjersey.org. Thank you.